Well, long before President Trump brought Elon Musk aboard, there was an organization called the Government Accountability Institute. That's exactly where our next guest is from, and he spent his career accounting for the money. The Vice President of GAO, Eric Eggers, welcome back to our show.
Alan, it's great to be with you as always.
Well, tell me this before we get into any specific cases, and without divulging any inside information on how you and Peter Schweizer and Seamus Bruner get the exclusives that you uncover. But what do your instincts tell you about where to look for the waste and theft when there's so much spending every year?
I think it spans as far as the eye can see. You know, Alan, it's funny. Everything you just laid out reminds me very much of that scene in the movie Dave when he brings in Charles Grodin. They go over the budget and they're like, wait, we're spending this much to do this? This is like that on steroids, except for it's even worse because there's an extra zero. And the money that you just mentioned from USAID is going overseas, or more often it's going to cultural programs that don't reflect the values of the American people or the values the American people want to see reflected in their government. And that's one of the messages they made very clear in November. We just did a podcast where we talked about, you've got U.S. senators defending $20 million, Alan, to have Sesame Street broadcast in Iraq, as if there's somehow Iraqi children are going to learn about hygiene and manners from stuffed animals as opposed to ISIS. But this is a policy that the United States government thinks makes sense. We're spending $2 million to promote LGBT activism in Guatemala. The military is spending $2.3 million on a VR training program to teach our military, teach men and women whose job it is to protect this country with guns and bullets, how to have hard conversations about DEI. So that's the kind of ridiculous thing you would think was invented in Hollywood, but unfortunately it's all too real.
Well, I've heard you and your associates talk about how bulletproof your investigations are. Tell our viewers why it is that you can stand by your reporting 100%, especially while so much of the media deals in opinion and generally less than truthful reporting.
The media doesn't just deal with opinion and less than truthful reporting, they're dealing in hysteria. That's one of the reasons why every time you see Donald Trump do anything, he's done a lot. He's had 38 executive actions in the first 2 weeks. Only Joe Biden and Harry Truman had more than that in their first 100 days. So Donald Trump's on pace to outdo both of those presidents potentially combined, and the media is losing their mind every step of the way. But they can't attack our reporting because it's based on facts. We dig through tax records. We're going through budgets. We're cross-referencing it with phone records and mapping out relationships. And that's what we've always done. Alan, you mentioned USAID. I actually traveled to Haiti to investigate some potential USAID abuse back in 2014. It had to do with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton back when they were in charge of the rebuild of Haiti. And what we found is that Hillary Clinton's Department of State used USAID to pay a guy who ran a cell phone company that had a contract to do business in Haiti. They gave him a chance to grow his cell phone business in Haiti. At the same time, that guy was paying Bill Clinton big money to give speeches and donating money to the Clinton Foundation. So USAID is one of the things that we've helped report on for nearly a decade in terms of abuse of tax dollars and unfortunately not furthering American interests abroad. And that's just what we've consistently tried to do with the Government Accountability Institute.
Well, people are asking questions now that so much mismanagement has been disclosed. A big question is, to what extent did the U.S. actually help our enemy? And the main enemy of Israel, Iran and Hamas. There's two very blatant examples that are kind of in the news now. GAI was the group that traced Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's approval of the sale of a uranium plant with the active ingredient in nuclear weapons. The plant was closed, but Putin then helped Kazakhstan get their uranium into the hands of Iran. If that wasn't bad enough, we've recently learned that President Obama approved more than $300 million for a concrete plant for the Palestinians. Much of Gaza is made of concrete, including the hundreds of miles of tunnels that Hamas built to hide from Israel. So uranium for Iran's nukes and concrete to hide the terrorist. With all the reporters in this country, why didn't that make the air?
Unfortunately, Alan, I think you know the answers because it doesn't fit the narrative that most mainstream media outlets are trying to sell to the American people. And that's one of the reasons programs like yours are so important. People need to hear the truth somewhere. We have consistently told people how the United States, unfortunately, doesn't just aid our enemies, but oftentimes members of the United States government who should be defending the American people's interests actually make money on doing the opposite by betraying their interests. That's why the Joe Biden, Hunter Biden Chinese business deal story was so important. You have Hunter Biden entering into a $1.5 billion deal with the Chinese Communist Party that they then use to buy up American companies with access to what's called dual-use technology. That's technology that Chinese military were very interested in because it had potential application. You mentioned the Hillary Clinton helping facilitate the sale of uranium to Vladimir Putin. They didn't just help do that. The Clintons made money off of that. That's why they were involved. $140 million went to their foundation from people that were involved in that transaction. So it's not just anti-American interests. It's unfortunately pro-crony financial dealings, and that's what makes it even worse than it should be.
Well, we'll be back with more from the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute, Eric Eggers, right after this short break. President Trump told Bret Baier that his next stops for the Elon Musk DOGE team is going to be the Department of Education, then the Pentagon. Where do you think he should go after that to find some of this tremendous waste?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of places he should go, and I think the Department of Education is an excellent place to start. But I would caution President Trump. You know, we've interviewed on our Drilldown podcast somebody who has previously run the Department of Education in the state of Florida and is a university president now, and he cautioned against shutting down the Department of Education for one very real reason, and that is that the states are basically in charge of education if you eliminate any federal oversight. So there's a reason why states like California, New York, and states with very liberal ideologies and very powerful teachers' unions might very much be okay with no federal oversight. So I think cutting waste and abuse in the Department of Education is a great idea. DOGE, I think, recently identified something like $900 million in grants to just essentially help cross-reference school performance across states, as if an Excel spreadsheet can't do that. So I think there's a lot of good ideas there. But the reality, Alan, is that waste and abuse and too much taxpayer dollar has flooded Washington, D.C. I previously worked on an expose that identified how wealthy Washington, D.C. had become. They actually lead the nation in wine consumption per capita. And of all the counties in this country, 6 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties in this country surround Washington, D.C. That's how much taxpayer money's there, much of it not going for things that actually benefit the American people. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole, man. You could put a blindfold on and throw a dart, and you'd find some money that probably deserves to be cut.
Well, we've heard so many examples of spending that seems just indefensible. USAID and its transgender comic books for other countries, things I would have never imagined. But the president has now made clear that where this is spending that would support our values, we'll do it. But it'll be under the trusted leadership of the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Listen to what he said.
We have to solve the fraud, waste, abuse, all the things that have gone into the government. You take a look at the USAID, the kind of fraud in there,
and you've found significant things.
Well, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of money that's going to places where it shouldn't be going, where if I read a list, you'd say this is ridiculous. And now there's some good money, and we can do that through any one of a number. I think I'd rather give it to Marco Rubio over at the State Department. Let him take care of the few good ones.
What percentage of that USAID budget do you think represents the few good ones, as the president refers to them?
It's not a lot, Alan. I mean, I think that's the point. If the number of executives, or excuse me, the number of examples of waste, abuse, and spending that run counter to American principles and values have flooded the zone, so to speak, it's because that's how prevalent they are. You know, Marco Rubio got his start in Florida. He was the Speaker of the House, and Florida has a very lean budget. They don't run up any debt, and that's part of the state constitution. So he comes from a background of being fiscally responsible. So I agree with President Trump. I trust Secretary Rubio to defend American values. You know, his first stop as Secretary of State was in Latin America, where he visited the Panama Canal. He visited Panama, and he told them that we would potentially reclaim ownership of the Panama Canal if they don't stop letting these Chinese companies run the canal, which is in contravention of what the agreement was supposed to be. So it just shows you how fundamentally different the power dynamic is becoming. The United States is leveraging the full weight and credit of what it means to be the most powerful nation in the world, and the rest of the world is taking note.
Well, let's turn the clock back for a moment. GAI uncovered millions of dollars that made its way to the Biden family. There were so many examples involving Joe's brother Jim, his son Hunter, and others. Then just before he left office, President Biden signed off on multiple pardons, not just for Jim and Hunter, but for his brother Frank, his sister Valerie, her husband as well. Look, I'm not an investigator, but what does that tell you about the extent of how far and wide Senator, Vice President, and then President Biden used his influence to collect foreign money?
Yeah, there was a Supreme Court ruling, I think back in 1915, in which the Supreme Court Chief Justice held that if you accept a pardon, there's an implicit admission of guilt in that. And so I do think that there's clearly an admission that they are guilty of many things. When Joe Biden first pardoned Hunter, the media narrative was, oh, he's just a loving and concerned father, and anybody would do the same thing if they could protect their son. Well, Joe Biden is now a loving and protective brother. He's a loving and protective uncle. He's a loving and protective, brother-in-law. He's got a lot of relatives he's taking care of. And I think the fact that these timelines have stretched back over a decade shows you just how widespread the Biden money-making scheme has been, how long it's been in operation. And the fact that it ran through December 1st of 2024 for Hunter Biden and up until this year for the rest of the family, to me suggests that there's a possibility that when Joe Biden was forced to step out of the race for re-election, that his family may have been involved in some negotiations, and who knows what the Bidens received in return for Joe Biden stepping down. But to the extent that any laws may have been violated in that negotiation process, his family would now be covered from any prosecution for that. So I think it's very notable to see how many of his family members received pardons and for the time frame under which they received them as well.
Well, one last question about the Elon Musk mission. Some Democrats are trying to use the courts to stop the cost cutting. Will that just delay the effort, or can a judge actually prevent the president from cutting these costs?
Hey, let me quote the great legal scholar Joe Biden when he wanted to forgive student loan debt. He said, "The courts may try to stop me, but I won't let them." So there's clear precedent from a president saying what he will and will not let the courts do. I think that the Trump administration has smart lawyers. The fact that they're taking all these executive action is not an accident. And so, I don't blame Donald Trump for not trusting the court system. Remember, these guys brought 4 different charges against him, and he seems to have prevailed in the legal system in all of them. So at the end of the day, I think he's reflecting what the American people voted for. So I'd expect him to prevail on this issue as well.
Well, Eric Eggers, thank you for coming back on tonight. It's always a learning experience to hear what you and the GAI are up to.
Alan, it's always my pleasure to be with you and your audience, and God bless you and the work you continue to do by telling the American people the truth. Thank you.